Welcome to the Adapter's Advantage, the podcast that shares insider stories about breakthrough moments that lead to success. Get ready for an inspiring conversation about adapting to change from Allego, the all-in-one sales enablement platform built for success in a hybrid world. Let's dive right in.
Hi, I'm Mark Magnaca. I want to welcome you back to the next episode of the Adapter's Advantage podcast. I'm excited to be here with Tiffani Bova. Now, Tiffani is an innovator across the sales world, someone who's highly recognized from media appearances, from the books that she's been involved with, as well as her role at Salesforce.com. We're going to be talking about all of them, but let me just give you a little bit of her bio before we jump right in. She's technically the chief growth evangelist at Salesforce, and she's the author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Growth IQ. Get smarter about the choices that will make or break your business. She's been named to the latest Thinker 50s list of the world's top management thinkers and is welcome. She's a welcome guest on Bloomberg, MSNBC, Yahoo Finance, and lots of other places. She splits her time between Hawaii, where she's from originally, and today we've got her in Los Angeles. So Tiffani, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mark. I'm thrilled to be here.
One of the first questions I have for you is when people first meet you and they ask you, so Tiffani, what do you do? What do you say?
Oh, that's such a hard question. So, let me back up a little bit. I used to be a quota carrying sales rep. I grew up in sales. I sold technology for almost 15 years. And then I spent a decade at Gartner Group as a research fellow covering sales transformation, go-to-market innovation, and indirect channel strategy. And when I was working there, I used to say, okay, have you ever watched the show House of Lies on Showtime? They're like, yes. I go, okay. Like that without all the fun stuff, right? Just the consulting stuff. And then Up in the Air with George Clooney, like all of that without all the other stuff, right?
Yes.
So it was a combination of House of Lies and Up in the Air, which was traveling around the world advising both startups and some of the largest technology companies on how to improve sales performance. That was an incredible decade. And then Salesforce asked me to join the company and continue doing what I was doing for Gartner, but doing it for us and for our customers and for the market. So I have this amazing situation where I get to just talk around the world, meet incredible executives, listen and learn, and advise, some companies on how to really get back to growth at the moment. But usually it's about how do we do it in a much more thoughtful way.
Well, that's a perfect pivot because I love this quote of yours, Tiffani. The fastest way to get people to love your brand is to get employees to love their job. And we're in this environment that you're well aware of. Some are calling it the Great Resignation. We've got a power shift, almost an asymmetrical power shift that's happened between employees and their employers, the likes of which we've perhaps never seen, certainly in the last 100 years. So when you think about that quote and getting employees to love their job, what's one of the big ideas from Growth IQ or some of the conversations you've been having that relates to that concept?
So I'm gonna keep it on sellers for just a second when it comes to that. I often, and I've said this for a long time, and if you've heard me speak before, you've maybe even heard me say it, but I kind of know two things for sure. Only two. One is salespeople do not wake up every day and go, my God, I can't wait to data enter. That is one thing I know for sure.
Yes.
The second thing I know for sure is that customers don't wake up and say, oh my God, today's the day. I go from stage 2 to stage 3 in the sales process.
Yep.
Those are two things I know for sure. So let's go back to the fastest way to get customers to love your brand is to get employees to love their job. So let's start with the employee for a second. How do you make it more seamless? Look, 66% of a seller's time is still spent on non-selling activities, and that was pre-pandemic. So I'm going to guess that's even, higher. Since 2019, productivity metrics have actually gotten stricter, and the amount of data entry that sellers have to make is higher. So we're not actually giving sellers the opportunity to do what you hired them to do, which is sell. At the same time, right, this pandemic hits, it completely disrupts the way in which companies have sold. It might have been a field sales organization that were, windshield time and airplane time and train time. And then you had an inside team that might have been account-based marketers, sales development reps, business development, or even customer success managers, right? Trying to then sell to other accounts. You had both of those things kind of working in harmony. And then overnight, field sellers were inside. That's a story that everybody knows at this point.
Sure.
But now the question is, how do you get them back into some sense of outside selling? When do you do that? Where do you do that? What would be the reason you would keep them saying, nope, you can do it, digital first, or, sort of video first, versus going and seeing face-to-face? It's not just about what we want as companies. We have to take into consideration what our customers want, for the safety of their employees and their people, and what are they doing? We have to find that balance. And so, it's been a shame to see that leaders, many, have over pivoted to productivity, to say, what are you doing every minute of every day, of every week, of every month, of every quarter, of every year, now that we're 18 months in, instead of saying, hold on, how do we balance kind of autonomy with this kind of, and flexibility with this much more strict measurement? And you have to find it, because that builds trust for your employees, that your seller is going to do what's best for the company and for the customer. Like, do you need to know they called 100 people, or you just need to know that they're adding to the pipe, deals are moving forward? And so for leaders, it's really important to coach more than you have in the past, and really let your people lean into training. So, that's the conversation around 66% of their time. And the data entry now, when I was selling, I was using a single user version of Act and Goldmine. And I would spin my Rolodex on my desk and go, that's who I'm going to call today. It was like very scientific.
Yeah.
But now technology could take a lot of that away. So as leaders, you have to start to make sure that you're using CRM, whatever it is, whichever system, that ultimately using it as an output device, not just a way for you to capture those productivity metrics. Now let's go to the seller side, right? Then the seller, they don't care what your process is. They're on their own journey. And so how do you make it easier for your employees to sell and your customers to buy? And if your employees feel like you don't trust them, you're always looking over their shoulder, it's all about productivity metrics, it's not about my health and well-being, guess what happens? They don't love their job. And then if they don't love their job, who suffers? Well, the company and the customer, right? So that's kind of the genesis of that quote, if you will, as it relates to sellers.
So this idea of helping sellers understand what's in it for them, number one, and there are a lot of things in it for them that aren't immediately apparent when you're being told you have to do something new that you didn't know you needed to do.
Right.
Well,
yeah. So let me just call this out. I'm going to give this one example. So let's say, like, pre-CRM, call 100 people, 10 will call you back, 2 will ask for a quote, 1 you'll close.
Yep.
Okay. I literally was trained that methodology in 1996. It's been a minute since 1996. Yet many leaders call 100 people, 10 are going to call, but do it in the CRM system. Instead of saying, hold on a second, we've invested all this money in technology. We have artificial intelligence, we have machine learning, we have, listening into calls, coaching, just-in-time coaching, next best action, all of this integration. And yet you still say, call 100 people, 10 will call you back, 2 will make a meeting. That's a management issue. The seller, unfortunately, is held to these metrics. Instead of saying, hold on, if you could call the 10 that are more likely to do the next best action, wouldn't that be better? And the seller, of course, is going to say yes. Now, here's the chasm. If the seller is not entering data into the CRM, the system is not going to get smart enough to tell you which 10 to call. And so it cannot just be an input mechanism. You have to start to trust the output. But the only way output works is if the data is in. Now, it doesn't, remember I said the 2 things I know for sure, sellers don't wake up to do data entry.
Right.
There's so many ways to automate that now. First party, second party, third party data, integrating multiple data sources. So there's only a small percentage of what a seller may have to enter. And that might be the conversation they just had, unless they're recording the call and letting natural language processing take unstructured data, structure it, use that as a way to look for, patterns and signals, et cetera. That's a whole nother conversation, but you could do that too. But ultimately, the less you can have a seller have to input, the more they'll start to value what comes out. But if what comes out doesn't actually help them do their job, they're turned off to it right away. So part of this has to be that managers have to change the way they manage. And then sellers have to trust the fact that technology is their partner. It's their best teammate they have. And if they get beat, I guarantee you they're going to get beat by someone using technology better than them.
I heard this quote from a CFO, Tiffani. He said that the threshold for business travel has changed post-pandemic. And I think, to your point, trying to figure out what this balance is, it's hard to say, and I think it varies by industry, but there's no question that for most of us, and you and I both I haven't been on the plane as much as you, but I've been on it a lot myself, and quite frankly, been quite happy to be off of it for this last 18 months. Although I've taken a few flights, the bottom line is that flying across the country from Boston to Los Angeles for a 1-hour meeting with the first appointment, back in the days of the Delta commercial, remember that Delta commercial, like the manager saying, get on a plane and go see people? I think that's largely over, because it's really hard to justify, we're just going to go travel to try to meet people to build rapport, with the idea being, if you can't get them to do what you and I are doing first, just for a first meeting, it doesn't mean you can't go see them, that it's a big ask to go jump on a plane if you haven't met people already. What's your thought to that?
Yeah, I started saying kind of June, July of last year, did I think it was going to stay where it is now, to your point? Like, I'm not going to get on a plane to do that first meeting from Boston to Los Angeles for an hour kind of a thing. Or do I think it's going to go back to, or stay where it is, go back to the way that it was, where I would get on a plane, right?
Right, 2019, right, exactly.
You've got those two.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use a really great consulting cop-out. I think it's going to fall somewhere in between, which is, depends who the customer is.
Yeah.
Depends what the opportunity is. Depends what the situation is. And that, unfortunately, you can't just go, a yes, no tree. Yes, no. But it helps if you go, first meeting, is this a past client? No. If it's a past client, yes. Do they currently use our technology? Yes, no.
Right.
I'm just playing that out, right?
Yeah.
And then it lands at an answer. Yes, go see them, or no, video first. I'm just, once again, using it as an example. That's a great way to understand, well, what are those thresholds?
Yes.
What are they and why? It's not every meeting for an hour across the country is valuable. And so I think that that's where we have an opportunity to change, because let's say your manager says, or you're my manager, and you say, Tiffani, nope, you are not going from Boston to Los Angeles for this hour meeting. It would be the reverse, LA to Boston, and I'm going to, and I want to go see the witch house in Salem, or eat something in Beverly. My family's from Boston. So I'll go. Right. And so you say, can't go. I say, well, hold on. The customer is putting together their entire executive team, right, and are going to give me 1 hour. And two of our competitors are getting in the same day or the same week, an hour. Yep. And I think if we don't show up, we are really going to put ourselves at a disadvantage. You manager go, absolutely. So that's what I mean, right? Versus just a hard, do not get on that plane, not going to happen, never going to go back. Now, if it was, it's just him, he said he has up to an hour, but it might only be a half hour, like that kind of thing. To your point, could we do it first video? Is that the best way to connect? Because I think what we've proven over the last 18 months is we can establish relationships virtually, which I always believed we could, but many field sellers believed that they only could do it face to face, or on a golf course, or at a dinner, or at a concert, etc. But we've learned that that's possible. We've also learned that customers appreciate it when it's short meeting, like instead of an hour, it's 15 minutes. And it's very insight driven. To your point, I've read the last transcript. I knew the 3 to-dos. I showed up with the answers. It was a very quick meeting. Customer goes, thank you for respecting my time. Only 15 minutes. You gave me what I wanted. Let's move on. And so there is value and benefit in this kind of hybrid when and where. But flexibility, going back to what I was just talking about, right? Having that autonomy and flexibility to say, you know what, I don't need to get on that plane. I can do it this way. And then I need to get on that plane. I need to do it that way. Do you trust me to make that own decision? Or do I have to go through all this process of, by me going through this approval, you don't trust that I'm doing what's best for the business and I'm blowing the T&E because I just don't care. And I think that that's not necessarily the truth, right? I think that there is the ability for you to give some trust back that I'm going to travel when I know it makes the most sense and I'm not going to when it doesn't.
That's an excellent point. I remember I said that who I heard this from was a CFO, and it was a valid point in his industry, but you've just added a whole nother layer of nuance on that. And it's really, it's about redefining the threshold that you just described, right? Because to take it one step further, you might say, listen, I have family in Boston. I need to go to this meeting and I want to visit my family because I haven't seen them for 18 months. And by doing that, we're killing two birds with one stone, so to speak, right? And there's no incremental cost to the business if you were going to fly for that other event, right? So I think you're absolutely right that it's going to require a higher level of finesse. And as much as people want to have black and white rules, that there's a lot of this that is gray, and you have to look at it not just with the tree, but on an individualized basis.
Yeah, and I'd also add to that, CFOs are an interesting conversation because it tends to be very bottom line P&L driven. Mm-hmm. And not that that's wrong, but sometimes you miss the subtleties. So, I often will ask companies, do you view your customer service organization as a cost center, or do you view it as a revenue engine like customer success?
Right.
And, sometimes I say, oh, of course it's customer success. And I'll go, okay, so talk me through how you schedule. Well, we get 1,000 calls an hour. I have 100 people. That means they could take 10 calls an hour. Each call is an average of 3 minutes. And I go like this, whoop, stop, time out. You view it as a cost center.
Yes.
Because I, am a customer and I have a 30-minute problem, and the customer service agent will get in trouble if the call goes longer than 5. So they're going to rush me off the phone. So I'm not going to get a good experience, right? That's just one example. And the same thing happens. The same thing happens with sellers, right? If it's only a decision. Now, we're doing a lot of stuff around, sustainability and carbon and the footprint and how many of our people are flying. What's the impact of the environment? What are we doing to offset it? Like that's an entirely different layer, right? Of just really leaning into sustainability and being net zero because we, put a lot of people on planes. And so, how can we balance what we want to do from an environmental standpoint with what we need to do from a business standpoint?
So it's a very, very powerful question. Let me, this podcast is called The Adapter's Advantage because I love to get to what causes people to make a pivot. So in your case, can you describe a pivot point or a specific moment of learning that just changed the trajectory of your career?
I'll use a new one. I wrote Growth IQ 3 years ago now. There's 10 paths to growth. You can see the image above my head on the 10 paths, but I missed employee completely. It's not a path, has no bearing. Now I talk about employee, but I didn't give it its due, sort of, as its own growth path. And so when I started working at Salesforce, I was saying on stage quite often, I don't think it's a coincidence that Salesforce is one of the best places to work around the globe. I think in 17 or 18 countries, it's number 1, and the rest of them, it's in the top 5. We're one of the most innovative companies in the world, and we're the fastest growing enterprise software company, all according to other people. This is not us talking about. Okay. And I said, I didn't think that was a coincidence. And so I went to our CMO at the time and I said, hey, I want to prove this out. Like, I'd like to see this correlation between, if you have really happy employees, you innovate faster, more and more sort of customer led, and then you derive this incredible growth. So we did a project with Forbes Insight, and lo and behold, we found that brands that do that and do that well have 1.8x faster growth rates. So for $1 billion brand, it's about a $40 million impact. And we did it very specifically. We looked at Glassdoor ratings, right? We looked at the S&P growth rates. We looked at the customer service index. So we didn't just go and do primary exclusively. We really looked at what was already out there and saw correlation. So if you go and look at that report, don't go, I can't believe so-and-so isn't on this list. It's because it wasn't exhaustive. It was just what we could grab from those. And so that sort of sent me down this path of this fastest way to get customers to love your brand is to get employees to love their job, and really just talk more about how employees play such a pivotal role in everything that a company does. Now, had I not sort of started working here where we are extremely focused on employee and we're extremely focused on, all the things that go along with that, pre-pandemic, and also very keen and clear on what our culture is. I don't think I would have sort of started to have that conversation. I was
Right.
sort of in the weeds about other topics. So for me, that was a huge pivot point. Now, since that, you can get that research, you can do Forbes Insight, Salesforce, so and look for it. And I'll tell you that hopefully it's short, four or 5 pages. It'll give you some insights that you hadn't thought about. From that,
I'll link to that.
absolutely,
Great.
it's called the experience equation. And so, the follow on to that is we've now done, that was US only, but now we've done a global study across sort of 13 countries, across 3 industries. It was a 6-month project and very sort of in depth. And that is going to be coming out in the January timeframe and really will be the basis, I hope, we'll see, for my next book. But I can tell you that was a blind spot for me. I've been a leader. I've run startups and divisions of Fortune 500 companies. It's not like I haven't been a people leader, but I hadn't really sort of correlated those 2 things. And I
Sure.
think you started this conversation out, the Great Resignation, people leaving work, like, what does that all mean? That, and the last 18 months has been a catalyst for the fact that this conversation is so much more important than it was. So that was a pivot for me, right? To
Yes.
not include it in Growth IQ, and really think about how does that play a role going forward.
Well, I will tell you, just along those lines of very cool content you've been involved with. And I feel like you had a cast of amazing friends who joined you on this one. But the story of sales video, I've shared that with our whole sales team. I mean, what a cool thing to do, almost a feature style film on the business and the origins of it. And having Professor Frank Cespedes and such an interesting group of people provide their respective frameworks on everything from spin selling to kind of how we got here. It's as you just described that, Tiffani, I'm imagining you could almost have part 2 of that movie that layers in this next piece of what you're learning.
Yeah. And that, the story of sales, we took it on a little roadshow and entered it in film competitions. It was a great, fun project. I think that sales gets a bad rap. It's not a 4-letter word. If you sort of go home and you're listening to this and your mom, when I grow up, I want to get into sales, like, oh, what? Right. Like, those car salesmen or women, like, oh, Glengarry Glen Ross, Wolf of Wall Street.
Right.
No, don't you dare.
Right.
And that's what the whole purpose of the movie was about. That, I, personally, right, I think in no other career are you 24/7, unless you're, a surgeon, something like that, outside of sales. Like, if your customers call you on a Saturday at 10 o'clock, you pick up the phone. Like, there is no downtime because sales is a 24/7 profession. So you have to really love it. But, you have to be committed to honing your craft, just like, your friend in learning how to get a better golf swing. If the goal is to become a scratch golfer, or is the goal to make club for your sales and for your company, like, put those goals out there, invest in yourself, and it's really achievable. And I have loved the profession of selling. I'm glad that that's where I ended up, and I wouldn't change it for anything. It's been an amazing 30 years for me, really talking about this and doing it. So, I'm a huge fan of the profession.
Well, I have 4 children. I have 2 daughters, and I have to tell you, it's so wonderful because right around the same time you were talking about earlier, but like for me in the late 80s, I was at school and I was interning at an investment firm, and it was literally, there was 1 woman out of 100 women in Boston. That's not that long ago, right? And so for my elder daughter to be able to see that movie with me, and not just see you, but also see so many of the other women who were part of it, and realize that exactly what this is. And then, Tiffani, to see the young women from the University of Texas, Dallas, who are graduating with a degree and sort of a certificate in sales. I mean, holy cow, what a transformation in less than 30 years.
Yeah, we have a long way to go. Look, there's not an MBA in sales. There's one in marketing. Howard's doing, amazing work down in Texas, and there's a handful of other ones. Frank's doing great work, obviously, at Harvard. And so, I would say that for me, sales is like, you really have to love it. Like, you really, really have to love it. There's there's sort of, A performers. I'm going to use your golf analogy for a moment, but there's kind of A performers, and that's kind of like the Tiger Woods or Michelle Wie of golf, born to have a golf club in their hand.
Right.
Then there are kind of B sellers who take golf lessons and become a scratch golfer, might take your money on Sunday, but they're not going to make tour.
Exactly.
But still really good. And then you've got a C seller who's someone who, no matter how hard they try, it's just really maybe not a fit for them.
Yep.
In a organization, it's probably like 14 to 17% of your sellers are kind of at that A category. Now, this is not about quota attainment. This is just about kind of the natural ability and the love for kind of what you do. It's the stuff you can't measure, right?
Yeah.
And then about 65% are in the Bs. And where sales leaders make the biggest mistake is they focus all their efforts on the A's and they try to make the B's A's. I'm never going to be Michelle Wie or Tiger Woods, but I'd love to play golf better and I'd love to take your money on Sunday. Right. And so that's commitment to the craft. Yeah. And you don't want all A's because sometimes they're difficult to manage. I'd say I'm an A. I didn't always fill out my pipeline reports. I didn't always do everything I was going to do. I did hit quota. I was a team player and all of that, but I was kind of a little out of the mechanics. I would kind of do what I thought would work for me. And it did. Where the B's are like, they are just looking for you to always sort of adjust and teach and coach and really improve. And if you could move the middle 2 to 5% in quota attainment, and 65% of your sellers are Bs, that's a huge impact. Now, I do not want you hear me saying, leaders, go categorize your people and then tell them you're an A, you're a B. That's not what I'm saying. Right. It's not what I'm saying, right? It's really just a way for you in your mind to go, I shouldn't test new selling methodologies with my A's.
Right.
Test it with your Bs. Learn what works. You want that engine to get better and better and better. You want to coach and support the A's when and where and how they need it. You want to, obviously spend time with them. It's not like they're just hands off and they do what they want, but it's less of a sort of, tighten of the screw. And so if you are listening to this and you go, I love it, I'm super successful, right? I want to be better. That's where you have to keep practicing and practicing and practicing. And so, if you are early in your sales career, my best piece of advice is keep selling. And when you don't win a deal, try to understand why not. And when you do win a deal, try to understand why and find your superpowers and sort of double down there. If you're just kind of doing it because it's like, oh, there's nothing else. I don't know really what I want to do. I have the gift of gab. I'm pretty good at it. And you're making a living, that's a very different thing. Really, I think sales is just super inspiring and fun. And if you're competitive, this is definitely the career for you.
Well, there's so much with Salesforce that I'd love to chat with you about, but I'm going to just focus on 2 or 3 questions in our remaining time here. Tiffani, one of the questions that I'm just personally very curious about is, how do you go from a Gartner analyst and make the pivot to what you're doing at Salesforce? How does that happen?
I think the harder pivot for me was selling and then becoming an analyst. I am not an academic. I play one at work. I am a true blue salesperson. I always say I bleed sales blood like that. That's what gets me excited. And I vicariously get to sell through all the sellers I speak to on a daily basis, both internally and externally on podcasts like this. So it was really hard for me to make that shift. And I'll tell you, my very first day at Gartner, we had an all hands offsite in Orlando at the Swan, the Dolphin and the Swan, where our symposium is. And we had one room, it was all the analysts, and there was maybe 11 or 1,200 people. And then 2 doors down was the selling organization. It was 3,000 or 4,000 people. Yeah. Okay. So I'm sitting in the back row because, I didn't know anybody. It literally was my first week. And the head of research gets on stage and is talking about all this stuff, and I'm, intently listening and taking notes. And he says this joke and puts up this quote from this philosopher. And everybody laughed. Well, pretty much the whole room laughed. I didn't get the joke. So I'm like, maybe I'm in the wrong place, right? Yeah. So I just took a deep breath. And I'm like, that's okay. Just right. And then maybe 30 seconds later, I hear the Rocky theme coming through the panels and the sales organization is clapping and stomping and shouting. And I'm like, I think I'm supposed to be over there.
That's so good.
What am I doing in here?
That's
Right.
great.
And so that was a really hard pivot for me, but it took me about 3 years to kind of find my legs on what it meant to advise and consult and listen and understand and sort of aggregate lots of data and be able to quickly tell a story about why that's important to, someone like the late Mark Hurd, who at the time when he was a client was at HP. And then he went on to Oracle, or John Chambers at Cisco, or Steve Ballmer or Satya Nadella at Microsoft, or, Ginny Rometty at IBM, or Michael Dell at Dell. I mean, it was those level of conversations. That's intimidating, and it's daunting for a seller who's so used to just going like, I'm trying to sell you stuff. And it's like, nope,
Right.
like, that's not the conversation you have at that level. Right. So it took me time. And then I kind of found my stride. Year 3 and 5, I started coming up with new and unique content. By 7, I'd really hit my stride. And I became a research fellow, which there were only about a dozen of us of the 1,200 analysts covering a topic, sales transformation, which for all intent and purposes, CIOs don't care about necessarily. And that was our audience. So, I really was blessed to have found a place that really supported sort of the topic that I was covering and realizing the value that it had to our broader customer community.
That's the part that is so unique. And so maybe that's part of the superpower that evolved, or that you recognize that, hey, I can do this. I can do this. It doesn't really matter who I'm talking to. I just have to realize how to adapt.
Well, I'll tell you something about superpowers is you can't kind of figure out what your own superpower is.
True.
Right.
That's true.
So, and or call yourself a thought leader, and or, say you're really shaping markets or advising, and really helping companies make big decisions. In the background, when a company I was working with had an incredible quarter because of something that they did that I helped them sort of strategize and execute, I would feel a sense of pride, even though no one would ever know that I had anything to do with it. But when customers and clients started telling me, look, you're really good at doing this.
Yes.
Then I started to understand what my superpowers were. And then I also understood what my non-strengths were, which not weaknesses, non-strengths, what my non-strengths were. And so I sort of put the non-strengths to the side and I doubled down on those superpowers. So if you're listening, like, you might be really good at writing emails, or you might be really good at giving demonstrations, or you might be really good at answering RFPs, or you might, whatever it is, let your customers sort of guide you on what those superpowers are. And that's where you want to spend your time. And then you have to, wait for sort of your customers, your company, your leadership, your managers to really recognize, where you add value internally. And if they're not recognizing it, right, that's where champions come into play, not mentors, but champions, someone who would put you up for something if you weren't in the room, right? Somebody who understood the value you bring. And so while I don't manage people here, I have champions that will say, if you're looking for someone to talk to an executive about this, Tiffani Bova is who you should go to. If you want that, someone else is who you go to. But those are the champions that will help give you greater exposure, both internally and externally. And then you're kind of on your way. And then now you can't fake time. Time is just something you have to put in. And if you're committed, as I've said a number of times, you will find your way forward.
I love that point, Tiffani, about you can't find your own superpower. And I think that I'm a participant in something called the Strategic Coach Program, which is an entrepreneurial coaching program. And literally the exercise they have us do is exactly what you just said, which is you send this letter and it's to 20 people who know you, right? And it's asking for their help to say, what have you noticed as it relates to this exercise? I'm trying to figure out, they call it the unique ability. It doesn't mean I'm the best person on the planet. It just means I have this special combination of passion, interest, skill set, curiosity, all these different things on this topic. And sometimes when the messages come back, first of all, if people are willing to take the time to do it, it tells you a lot. And second of all, when it comes back, it's amazing how powerful it is when people you respect tell you what they think you're good at.
Well, the holy grail, nirvana for me, is I loved what I was doing, and then people recognized it and identified that it was my superpower. And then, so it's not that you don't know what it is. what you find joy in and what you like,
Sure.
like doing, if you really can hone that, it can become your superpower. Right. And so I think it's two sides, right? One, you might not understand what it is. Like, I didn't ever think in a million years I'd work for, an analyst company that was very data driven. I'm not a data person.
Sure.
But what I learned was I could read 10 or 15 Gartner research notes, and I could pick the key points that I knew could create a story that if I gave it in front of a group of sellers that were now moving from on-premise to cloud technology, what would be important to them?
Totally.
And that's where I didn't know. I knew I was pretty good at storytelling, but I didn't know about this sort of data angle and being able to tell data stories in that way. So, I can say you may think you know what it is. You might have a love for something that you do or really enjoy it. And so how do you create a role where you get to do what you really love every day? I mean, this is, the best place I could be.
I'm so happy for you on that. I really am. It's great to hear. Last question.
Yes.
Based on your experience, Tiffani, what's the most important skill you think sellers need to either learn or improve right now?
Oh, I would have answered this very differently when I was a seller and when I was a manager versus today. So, in my 20s, it was sort of, I don't know what I wanted to do. In my 30s, I changed jobs every 18 months. I was in sales and I was like looking for more, responsibility and wanted more challenge. And back then I was a higher risk, but for me, it was a way I could start to move up the ladder and learn more things. And I would say that I probably didn't listen as much as I do now. And so I probably missed opportunities for additional selling. I might have missed opportunities to establish a better relationship with a client. I might have missed opportunities to actually back off of something I was trying to sell, because it wasn't the right time. So, and I'd say as salespeople, we get really excited about what we do. Look, we love what we do. We're trying to close a job, a deal. We got a manager is telling us, move this deal, close this deal, close it this quarter, like do whatever you can do. And it puts us at odds at listening to what our customers really need. And I would tell you that if you get better at becoming a master asker, asking better questions, you have to get better at listening. And then those answers, those insights absolutely will give you the roadmap to close that deal or enhance your career or move to another company or expand your sphere of responsibility. But you have to be better at asking questions and then better at listening.
I love it. Tiffani, if people want to learn more about you, about Growth IQ, about the work that you're doing, what's the best place to do it?
So follow me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active. I'm also active on Twitter. It's at Tiffani_Bova. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well. I have a podcast called What's Next with Tiffani Bova across all the streaming platforms. And then obviously I've got the book. It's translated in 9 languages. It's on Audible. It's on Kindle. So you can check that out.
Tiffani, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you for the work that you're doing. We're going to be using this in a number of different places because there's so many different messages that you've shared here. So I just want you to know you're an inspiration. Keep doing what you're doing. And I hope our paths cross again.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
You've been listening to The Adapter's Advantage, a podcast from Allego. Stay connected by subscribing to the show at allego.com/podcast, leaving us a rating and comment, and sharing episodes you love. That helps us bring you more conversations about breakthrough moments that lead to success. Thanks for listening. Until next time, remember that one new idea can change your life.